Hey everybody, welcome to Sunday's Tinderbox Meetup. What is it, May 29th? Unbelievable that the year is almost half over. Crazy. And Mr. Bernstein is off doing Mr. Bernstein stuff, so he will not be with us this week. And I don't think next week either. And I will not be available next week either. I'll be on an airplane. So that is fine. So let's just jump right in. So hi, everybody. Looks like we don't have anyone new, although I don't know Mark very well. Mark, you want to say hi?
Hi, yeah, I'm a physicist working at Glasgow University. I'm doing half research and half project management for a grant that we've got to develop technology for the LIGO project, gravitational wave detector in the US.
So really super geeky tech stuff. I love it.
Yeah, back in the day, I got a diploma of computing studies from Melbourne University in Australia. And so I turn everything into a coding exercise in the end.
Fun. And what's your primary use of Tinderbox?
Working on notes. So for example, I've got some prototypes for purchases because I have to do a lot of purchasing, to-dos. I have a log system. So that I can just easily create a log with today's date and then categorize it with different tags and stuff.
Yeah, very cool. All right, thanks for joining. Do you have any particular burning topics you want to talk about today?
I have a question.
The one in the agenda sounded interesting, so.
Yeah, no, we'll jump into that in a minute. Mr. Anderson has got his homework. But Anthony, I think you were asking something.
David,
sorry.
I was going to ask, since I'm a newcomer here, I have no minimal knowledge of well, not the background, but what people have used. Has anybody ever heard of a product that there used to be a genre of software called a data dictionary, which I would argue no longer exists. The word is used. The idea was the data dictionary would be a central bill of materials database to keep track of all the artifacts in the applications. Anybody ever heard of a product called Data Manager?
No.
AD Cycle?
No.
Okay. Mainframe. So this is not a mainframe crowd.
I don't think so.
Okay. I mean,
not anymore.
All it comes right. Chucky, you're familiar with it, but basically, the primary issue that interests me with Tinderbox is when you start working on a problem that's in a computer, you need documentation. And in effect, since no one will pay, developers will not write documentation and management will not pay to have documentation written, the only documentation is the systems themselves. And so at this point I'm on, I think, page 120 on my iPhone on Tinderbox Way. So I'm in my state of innocence and ignorance and hope is this tool with some others may help with doing documentation on the fly. When you're dropped into a situation and you got to make sense out of something, can I pull it into Tinderbox and DevonThink and a bunch of maybe some other things, that host productivity thing? So this is this is Data Manager in its day was the gold standard of central data dictionaries. It had 900 claimed installs in North America. And people were buying it like mad. The hard part of all these things is getting the information into them on an enterprise scale, not on a project, not on a personal project scale. That's, basically you consult the subject matter expert who has a good memory. So so nobody here has experienced Central Data Dictionary, big IBM site, etc. And yes, I have a new library. That's so
The
anyway.
Irish, like Dublin Library, huh?
Yes, it's in the New York Times today. But anyway,
Yeah, so
okay.
we both look smart.
Okay.
How would you compare a data dictionary to a database conceptual schema?
The schema would be a portion. I mean, there are what, 5 levels? So conceptual, logical, physical, then you throw it over the fence and the DBAs have a whack at it.
Yeah.
And push it around, and then you tune it. So there are at least five levels.
Yeah, which by the way is one of the sources of the 7-layer OSI model, was replicating some of that in a network protocol sense.
All right, guys, this is fun, but I think we're geeking out and going down a really nasty rat hole. So
yes, okay,
let's
thank
move
you.
On.
Well, David,
okay.
could you share some documentation on Data Manager, just so others who might have some interest
Oh God,
could take a look at what it was and what it was trying to do?
Give me a few minutes.
Well, maybe not this time, but perhaps
next
a
time.
forum posting or something like that. Yeah.
All right. So before we jump into Mr. Anderson's homework, does anybody have any other topics or concepts that they want to be talking about today? Okay, and then one other thing I want to raise is I really loved Mark O'Connor's suggestion on the forum about a monthly challenge. And so I'd love to see us do more of that. I think we have our monthly challenge for June. So have you guys all seen that? Yes, no?
Yeah.
So I'd encourage people to pop up and take a look. I've already submitted my response to the challenge. I'm not sure if anybody saw that yet.
Yeah.
But I encourage you to.
Could you talk a little bit about the ground rules for the challenge? I mean, should somebody present a challenge that they don't have an answer to, or they're hoping the community will come up with an answer, or is it intended to be something that somebody's figured out and wants to see if anybody else has any alternative solutions? I mean, which way do you think that goes?
Oh, hang on just a minute. Mary Beth popped up. I don't think there are any ground rules. Hang on just a minute. Hey.
Well, while he's answering that, I think the idea was it was more like doing something like a Makeover Monday or some of these other things have done. This really arose because we've been having this conversation circling the drain about documentation. Funny enough, the subject's come up just now, but it's the thing, and those of us who sat close to the burning sun of documentation know it's a little bit more difficult than people assume, and the assumption that's understandable is that, well, how can it be? What the reason I'm not getting traction is I just haven't read the right documentation. And actually, I think, and it was really interesting, Paul Waters' post, which I think spoke true, which is the way, because Tinderbox is an open-ended tool set, and nor is it designed, so it's not particularly constrained. It wasn't built from the ground up as something like a particular programming language or something. So it's got lots of odd little bits and bobs, and also is been linked to the Mac OS and System 9. So there are all sorts of interesting sort of partial dead ends in there that still matter to a few people. So when you encounter this thing in the first one, it just seems too much, but you don't have to use everything. And the idea was, well, let's take a practical task and just say to people, have a go at it, and then see what other people did. So it's not a competition. There isn't a right or wrong. There will doubtless be certainly more than one way to do things.
Oh, everything's a competition, Mark. Come on.
And the other thing, well, as we'll come to the thing I'm just about to present, is that it's really a jumping off point. And the most useful thing about doing it is, I think it will get people just doing something rather than worrying about how they do it. And after a while, you'll find you stop worrying about how you're doing it because you found that you can do it. You may find ways as you go along of doing it better, but getting away from that starting thing of it's all too difficult, and it doesn't make sense. And if only there was a magic wand to get me to the other side of this hurdle.
Well, what was interesting about Mark's challenge, though, that I really appreciated was One, I did make it. I put myself on the clock like speed chess, and I tried to figure out how quickly I could do it, and it took me 25 minutes. But at the end of the day, it was it was interesting. As I was going through, I realized that it was a 9-step process for me to go from here to there, and at different methods. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how someone else does it. But what I liked with what he did was, he put a challenge and then a data set, and I found that really useful. Hang on, someone's at my front door.
And that's sort of how it started, because I sort of find that, one of the problems about doing demos is it takes about 10 times as long to write the specimen data as it does to do the actual demo. Making up real data is really hard. It's either far too homogeneous or not, or not, diverse enough. And so it's so much easier. And so it's really nice. And the interesting thing is it was nice. In fact, he used some tools in Scrivener to just make up the data set. So that's nice. But
so
part of my troll was
one for June. Let's see what else other people can come up with. And then if anybody wants to propose for July, let's try July. Now, I tried to over-engineer it when I was appropriately told I was over-engineering it. So, we will want to think about as a community, though, how do we want to select the July challenge? Or it could be just to come first serve, whatever. All right.
I think, yeah, and I just one last thought on that is, the thing that's useful here is there was actually some data to play with. What's much harder is to say, here's a challenge to do this process. But the nice idea of this central thing is you're working off a common data set. So even if you all end up with a different file, there's some point of similarity in it. If we all go away and made up our own data to do the same thing, it becomes much harder to map across and see where someone's had a really good idea. Because most of these ideas will actually can be transported across. But for instance, having a common data set underneath makes it a lot easier to see where that point of commonality is, and so which bits of the structure you might want to borrow from somebody else's file for your own.
Yep. Okay. So that's that. Let's encourage that we play with that more. I'd love it if you guys though can download my sample or do yours first, and then put it up there, and then let's compare and contrast our different approaches. All right. So any other comments, ideas, thoughts at this point? No. So Mary Beth, how are you doing? How's the hand?
I'm doing good. Yeah.
Mary Beth was out playing hoops with her kids and broke her hand. Someone came up and did blocked her shot and broke her hand.
We could always say it was the 7th game in an NBA final.
Yeah, all good.
That would work too, right?
All good. I think you're rocking. That's fantastic. All right. So I'm so glad you brought up Tom Wheeler's qualitative data analysis model. I think it's awesome. And let's update it to modern times. So let's jump right in and Mark, take it away.
Okay. This is something actually I've been meaning to do for ages. For those who go that far back with Tinderbox, in 2010, Tom Webster, who was a pollster, so he did opinion polls and exit polls and that kind of thing, gave a really interesting talk at the Tinderbox San Francisco weekend in 2010, and subsequently put on a video which is online. It's in Vimeo. It appears to watch it, you actually have to sign in, but you can do a sort of free log up with a disposable set of credentials to watch it. And I still commend it to people. You can't follow the process he uses there simply because the changes in the way the Tinderbox was rewritten, going from version 5 to version 6 with a move off old frameworks onto the modern Xcode frameworks, and very strong pressure at the time that people wanted a single window app. That didn't last long, but at the time it was a lot of people wanted it. Meant that, for instance, what's shown actually on my screen at the moment, this is just still in the video, but part of Tom's method was to literally drag from one window and to another, which you can't do at the moment. He was dragging aliases onto a map. And I kept coming back to this thing and thinking, but there was a really interesting idea. So what he was doing in his particular case, and the example he chose was, I think it was a movie dinner theater type thing, and they would they'd taken comments from people, and the idea was he'd go through and triage these comments so he could write up a report. What do they like? What do they not like? And I've taken some of that. And it's been a really interesting exercise over the last few days, because I've been trying to not overfit it to the original model, because I think it's the useful part in this is doing some triage. So if I just move that out of the way. So what I have is this document. There is a link to this document in the forum Meetup today, so you're welcome to grab a copy. I have done this section here. I have done some notes, so you can hopefully read through roughly what I thought I was doing, and where some of the bits and pieces are hidden. But the main thing I want to do really is to talk through the core process. In Tom's method, he had some source data which he exploded. I don't think we'll go down the rabbit hole. And so my starting point is going to be, I've got a set of data. I've deliberately used some context here, because actually the worst thing, as I labored on this, I thought the one thing I don't want people to do is to take this document and just use it as is. I really hope that people will take this document and think, oh, right, what it really needs is this or that, and change it accordingly. And so I've deliberately, the words will be confusing to us all, and they're not intended to have any particular insight. But so our starting point is I've taken a small amount of data here, and I've assumed that what we've done is we've taken some information. It might be reading notes, it might be an exit poll, it might be some data you got sent, and we need to work through this. I put a few here with a Q at the front, which might indicate that maybe someone's asking a question. And this is just to allow us to think for a moment on the fact that, okay, you might, for instance, you might say, well, I'm not even going to bother to look at this. I'll remove that, or I might start a different way. What I've done here anyway, in the basic model I've given you, is all the information, all the notes that get put in this container data will get given a prototype, really just to show a few what we used to call key attributes, displayed attributes now. In Tom's video, he had an attribute for sentiment, which of course now is being co-opted for another sort of use in Tinderbox in system attributes. But his idea was just something was showing, is it good, is it bad? So I've called it item sentiment here. And the main thing is we're going to go through and we're going to try and pull out some topics. Now, one thing Tom did was he also said, well, what you can do is you can also do some initial investigation. And one thing you can do is you can take, we'll start over with this. If I just do show information, get info for my.
Hey, you want to stop there real quick, Mark, for people paying attention? How did you do that? You right.
So I'm just about to do it. Sorry, and I'll start by doing it on the right container. So if I go to, I'm going to select my container that has all these notes I'm interested in, and I'm going to select it, and I'm going to do Command Option I, which is get info,
or for those watching the video, right mouse click. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there you go. It's all the same. Now the other thing I can do is, so I can make this a bit bigger, is if I click on the window and drag it, it tears off into a standalone window. And that's useful because I can now do this. I'm going to select so normally it'll probably open up on this, you'll be more familiar with this tab. There's one at the bottom called Words, and that defaults to the document. Well, what I'm going to choose is the note and its descendants, which is effectively data and everything inside it. And basically, there's a word cloud of the most common words in it. This is incredibly simplistic. We're back in the world of machine learning and spotting common things, rather than something the human mind is better at spotting what isn't on the page. But nonetheless, from this, we'd see that a word like audio is common in this set of data. And I've just demonstrated by clicking on a word, you can actually begin to do a search for where that occurs in the document. So I'll put that by for a moment. So that's one way you might go through and say, all right, I'm going to start looking for whatever these terms mean in my data when I'm looking at it. Another way Tom had was he that's interesting. He had was he built agents for some subjects he thought were going to come up, and I thought, well, rather than fall into this trap that often happens where we end up building an agent for everything of interest, and then you have lots of agents that are all running and they're all competing with one another. I just put one in here. What I've done in this one is I basically have made it so that its search term basically is to look case insensitively at the name of the note, the title, using the value that's stored in the agent's myString attribute. So here it's looking for the term malice, and lo and behold, we see this.
So Mark, let's pause there right there. I think this is an incredibly important teaching moment for those that are watching this. So what you've done is you're using an agent designator, or you're using a designator called agent as a search query, and that's not necessarily intuitive to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you can talk about that a little bit more and explain what's happening.
Yeah. Okay. So this goes back a long way when, they would crop up that someone said, there's sort of 50 things I need to look at, and I've now got 50 agents, and now everything's sort of slowed to a crawl. But often you don't actually want an agent for all the things you're looking at to be there all the time. What you actually want is the ability to see the thing that you're most interested in. So if I decide to look, that was for bad, we'll
just pause you real quick. So
Yep.
the way you would hard code this, you would say name.iContains parentheses : Bonham, right? So essentially what you're doing is you're creating a variable for yourself that you can then more easily change.
Yeah, so I just changed the myString, and lo and behold, instead of having 3 matches, we now have 2. And I've just in slightly bigger text, you can see. So the first part is inside data, and the only reason that's there is that I don't want to look outside this container. So I want this agent here to only look inside the data container, because this might be part of a much bigger document. So that's just a scoping thing, and that's a really useful thing if you're writing agents, is to always start by framing it as tight as possible, so you get as little extra noise, as it were, into your query. And then in this case, instead of where I could, for instance, I could write the same query as is actually going on at the moment by typing this. So here I'm hard coding. For some reason this document is taking a long time to update. So
I think you misspelled Bonham.
Did I?
I think it's bonus or something like that.
It should be. No, it's found 2 things were there. It's just that for some reason it's not. And this is Cod Latin, so all bets are off for classicists. But I've just made that change to make the point that what I've done was I've taken something that would start as like what you see here on screen, and instead I've said, well, I want to be able to change that, and rather than seeing what I'm typing now in terms of changing the query, I'm going to shift the point of editing to myString agent. I'm basically saying instead of taking a literal string value, what I want you to do is I want you to look at the myString value for the agent. And this is a designator, an action code designator that is exactly for this purpose. And it's used in agent queries, and it's used in agent actions, because although the parent of an alias in an agent is the agent, not the original parent, it can sometimes be confusing. So it's an easier metaphor to say, no, what I want to do is I want to get this value from the agent that's running this. So that's all that's happening there. And what that's allowed us to do is just do an initial stuff. But this is a bit of a side, because I want to get to the main part, which is that. So what Tom wanted to do was to very quickly rip through a whole lot of data, and his method was to use a map. And what I've done is I have adapted the map And because we can no longer drag and drop from one window to another, what I've done is I've set this, the map you're looking at is an agent. It's an agent map, but I've set it so the automatic formatting is turned off. The cleanup agent attribute, which is, quickly bring that up.
I did not know you could do that.
Alert
Awesome.
from HubSpot.
Okay,
Enable
so here we go.
HubSpot mail application plugin.
Right, so if I go back and select the actual thing here, so what the agent that the map is that's creating the map saying inside data, so as before, the same thing, and I'm saying is process is false. So I'm using a Boolean attribute that I know will start as false, that will get me all the data that's in here. Part of the reason for using the Boolean is I'm thinking ahead that we might add new data to this container later, whether we empty it out now or whether we just add later, but we don't want to reprocess information we've already had. So the map is getting us.
And to be clear, the is processed as a user-generated Boolean.
Yes, it is. And in the README, I've pointed that, and I have in the document, I've given a description for each of the user attributes. There aren't many of them. So in that sense, hopefully it's self-documenting as to what they do. So I've made this map, and because I've turned off the cleanup action, it's slightly odd. You might think it would the attribute name would start agent, but the thing you're looking for is this guy, cleanup agent, and it just means that if you turn it off, it stops the problem you otherwise get, where every time the agent updates, it relays out the map. So now I can move things around on the map, and there is no problem.
Now, what happens when it discovers a new item?
Well, I can fake that, actually, funny enough. I can put something in there, and if I just update that now, there you go, and it's now showing up.
Right, and then what does it look like on the map?
So in the map, so the next part is all the stuff coming in. The next trick is so that the agent is finding only, as it were, new data. The next thing is I've got a so-called smart adornment, and this is an adornment that actually has its own query, and its query is to look for a Boolean that I've called has been examined, which is also false. And it also has an on remove, which is an action you don't see used very much. But basically, the moment I move one of these off the notes for review adornment, I'll flip its Boolean. And the whole point of that is that when you open the map for the first time, all the new stuff is going to appear in this adornment at the bottom. Now, it may appear in a great big stack. That's not the problem. The whole idea is that the concept that Tom had was that all these boxes you see at the top of the screen are essentially, you can think of them like stamps, but the other way up. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a touch and go. So we're going to take something and we'll take this note. We say, oh, that's about boats. And they said something pretty bad about that. And actually that was going to be a quote as well. And then when I've done, and each time I do this, what's actually happening is all of these adornments have an on add action, which is fired when you place a note on top of an adornment, because an adornment exists only in a map and it doesn't nest in the way that a normal container does. So essentially, every time I put this note onto another adornment, you'll see. So this one has now got it. The planes says, right, add the term planes to the attribute topics, and sure enough, if I click this guy, that's been added. We could be apples as well. Again, I'm deliberately using sort of nonce terms because I don't want to get lost in, you know, what the detail is. It's more the process, what's going on here. So every time I move one of these one of these aliases around, I'm basically adding information to the original note. And depending on what I drop it on, it gets more information. You can, if you want, here I've set the good and bad, which is in fact setting, in this case, it's actually setting a item sentiment to positive or negative, but I've also got it set in color. There's a limitation in doing that because, of course, it's really a binary thing. It's either a color or no color, or no color or one of sort of two colors. What it can't be is two colors at once. But you can do all sorts of things. You could, if you wanted, you could set flags. I don't know if people are familiar with that. If I just quickly.
Hey, Mark, before you move on too fast, can you go
Yep.
back to your action and explain how, as you move from trains to boats to planes, it's actually additive as opposed to replacing?
Yep, I
And
absolutely can.
maybe you can demonstrate that by removing the plus and show the difference.
Oh, okay, right. So I don't know if that's sort of showing up, but what that's saying is dollar topics, which is the attribute topics, plus equals, and then a string value trains, because this, the point of this adornment is say, right, that the subject matter of the thing that I've just put on it refers to trains. The old-fashioned way of writing the same thing would be to write.
Yeah, Mark,
this is
before you go there, though, why don't you just demonstrate the topics equals and show how trains gets overwritten by boats, gets overwritten by planes?
Okay, right. If I was to write it like this, so topics equals trains, I'll take this note and I'm going to, well, this note is already set to apples and planes. If I put it on trains, it's now gone to just trains, because what I've said here is set the value of topics to be exactly this and nothing else. But this actually is a set. So what we actually want to do is, we used to write it like this. We'd say, make this list of things, the existing list, dollar topics plus the new value. And as of version 9 or 9, I think it's version 9, it came in that there's a shorter form of doing it, doing the same thing, where we say dollar topics plus equals. And that's doing exactly the same thing. It's saying, take the value you've got and add the value to it that's on the right. So if I was to take this note now and do this, you'll see up in this top corner that it's now got 3 topics associated with it. Is everyone with me so far?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
the next part, and you'll notice the other thing I said to you, that once you've moved it off notes to review, because it has an on remove, has been examined, is set to false. Oh, sorry, set to true, which means that these notes now no longer match the query for notes review. If I was to take this and set it to has been examined, and I set that to, you can watch what will happen. So this guy's been recaptured by the smart adornment. So now you understand that in taking it off, I've set the code so that this box is only showing the things I haven't dealt with yet. And I can have things on screen and I can make all these changes. But the next part of the process is really how I envisage us using is you take one thing, you stamp whatever you need onto it, and then you put it in the done list, and lo and behold, it disappears. How can this be? Right. So this is where the fun happens in this. So
Yeah, Mark, before you move on though, you did something else that I think people need to understand. Can you go look at the quick stamp and explain that function real quick?
Yep.
I don't want us to lose track of it. I use this like every day, all day. This whole ability to do quick stamps. I think there's a lot of value in that.
So Probably where most people start out changing attributes that don't have, I mean, we probably know that if we want to change the color of something, you can go to the appearance inspector. But what happens if it's a user attribute and you want to change a value? Most people are used to making a displayed attribute, so by which I mean this little table up here. We may decide that we want to change something, so I could change it, I can edit anything in this field. But if that's not shown, or I don't want to alter what's here, the quick stamp, which is on the third button in, which is the properties inspector, and it's the second bit here. And if I recall, it also has a quick stamp. I think it's Command 2. Oh no, sorry, forgive me. It's Command 3. So if I was to set this to something else, close this and do Command 3, lo and behold, it's going to come up on the prototype inspector, and then I just select the prototype tab. So it's another quick way to get back to this. And there's a search box here. So if we wanted to find a different attribute, we can pick one out and it will auto match. And you can see, lo and behold, that in fact, this note's displayed attributes is itself stored as an attribute value. But going back to our has been examined, we can see that this note on the right-hand side, there's a button here, is assigned to this note. So for the alias nullum malus, the value of has been examined is true, but the default is false. So I can press this button, which will make this box false. If I press apply, lo and behold, I've reset the value to false. And in doing so, I've now made this go back into the sort of for review bucket.
And to be really clear, so that like where this has value, for example, is you can do this not just with one note, but if you select multiple notes at once,
yes,
you can apply a quick stamp on multiple notes. And it's really valuable if, for instance, if you've dragged a CSV file into Tinderbox, that note then is, and then you apply a prototype to the notes that just got imported, you'll note how the displayed attributes for those imported notes will not be changed because they have no inheritance to the prototype. So you can then select all those notes, do the quick stamp and reset the displayed attributes, and then every one of those notes gets updated. So this is a really, really efficient and effective way of doing that.
And if I make this a bit thinner, we can see that now for this alias here, both the alias and its inherited value are false. When I take it out and just refresh that, we'll see that assigned to this note, this in this case the alias, it's true. So that gives you a bit of tailback. So that's another useful way that you can tell if something is inherited or not. And for those who aren't aware, if you look at the top corner here so for this selected item, it's got 4 displayed attributes, and you'll notice the top 2 are in bold text and the bottom 2 are in normal text, and that's because these basically have a non-default value set. So I can do, in fact, one of the things I can do is I can reset it. This is another way to set it. So if I do this, it now has no topics set, and you'll notice that topics has gone from being in bold type to being in normal type. And I can just rebuild that data by just doing that. And
yes, Mr. Tom, and you're on mute.
Mark, thank you. Thank you very much. I just have a quick question. When you use a quick stamp, doesn't it replace the value? Is there any way you can make that value additive if you are using the quick stamp?
You would need to, what you'd need to do in here is you'd need to take, well, if I did it this for topics, yeah, we got that selected. We'll go for topics. I'm doing this on the fly, so I think this should work. What I'd need to do is, if I wanted to add something else, because this in this case it's a list, I literally just add I manually do that and apply, and I've now got 3 values at the top. Sorry, that should be pairs. Doesn't really matter. There isn't. You can do limited. Way back in Tinderbox, you could sort of do a bit of action code in here, but I'm not sure it's a wild thing to do. If you wanted to add stuff, my temptation would be to make a stamp and just write it in action code. So if we were doing that, we'd make ourselves a new stamp and we say $topics plus equals, as we discussed before, and whatever it was we wanted to add. And then if I apply that, this new value has got added to this guy, and if you don't need it anymore, you can just delete the stamp. I don't find it much of an overhead. The difference between a stamp and a quick stamp, you might say, well, aren't they doing the same thing? But both apply to the selected note or notes, and the code that whatever you set to happen, the new value you set to apply, or the code you set to run the stamp, runs once and once only per click of the apply button. The difference between a stamp is that I could have, for instance, I could have made the stamp. Let's take a different thing. Let's say I could have a new stamp, and we'll just say $topics plus equals apples. And we will say is meta, which is one of the other things I know we've got here. Now, if I stamp this guy, I've set the is meta flag to true, and I've also set topics to apples. And if I had taken 2 notes out here, and I'd selected both of them and stamped them, lo and behold, if I check this guy, he too has got meta set. I'm just going to check those for a moment while I explain what that bit does. So, but does that answer your problem, your question, Tom?
Yes, Mark, thank you so much.
Okay, so there are a number of things we can do. I've explained. So essentially all these gray panels here are just ways of setting a value. They don't all have to be, in this case, they're all setting, I've got them setting topics, but it could be something else. And this is my point from earlier, that rather than say, oh, I've now got to be doing something with topics, if you've got 2 or 3 different attributes you want to set, whether different adornments set different attributes or they set a combination of attributes to different values, that's all fine. It's whatever you want it to be. It's whatever your review problem, your review challenge is. The idea here, the key, I would say the key construct, the key idea here is that you've got a visual way of just applying values to notes. And you'll also notice that these chaps aren't being picked up because they've come off notes for review. They're no longer being found by the notes for review smart adornment, but they're still on the map because I haven't put them in the done box yet. So I've finished with them.
Hey, Mark, can you do one more thing too? Is just so people see it, like click on pairs.
Yep.
Yeah. So can you also demonstrate how you can have multiple? So it doesn't have to just be one item, like do flag equals red or something like that.
Yep, absolutely. Good point.
And then the way he's getting the line break right there, by the way, is if you hit Option Shift in an action code field, that's how you get that extra line.
Option
break.
return.
Or option return. Yeah, option return. Sorry.
I think if I got my syntax right, we'll see what happens. We'll take this guy and stick him on here. Has he got? Is it flags? Is it flag or flags?
Might be flags. Yeah.
It's flags. It's flags. Actually, here's the thing. I should have noted, because if you look closely on the second line, flag is in black. If I change it to an S, it's now in a sort of magenta color. the magenta color is telling me, okay, that this is an attribute name, whether a user one or a system one that Tinderbox recognizes. So if I put this guy back on here, off, he should.
Oh, remember, flags only are viewable in outline, right?
No, they should be viewable in the, whether they work on aliases, they ought to. Let me just see why. So I can, for instance, I can open get info. So I've right clicked or done Command Option I, go to attributes, appearance, flags. Okay. So that should be doing that. Let's go back to there. Oh, it's because I didn't save my edit properly. There you go. He's got a red flag now, which is that little. You can look up flags, which I can find quickly. It's a really quite neat thing that often people might not have come across. Just sorry, just bringing up where did I put them? So there's a hot page in ATBRF, but you can probably see in the picture you can really get quite funky with your flag designs, and you can even have up to 3 characters of text. So you could actually put quite a lot of meaning in there. So it was one of the things that occurred to me, but I didn't want to overcomplicate the demo. That's one thing you might do. You might actually have some flags here that again are giving you a visual tellback. So this is a way that if you're quite a visual thinker, or you don't want to be sort of thinking about code when you're just trying to sort through your data, it's a quite nice little mechanism. So what I'll do, so I'm option dragging here to bandbox, which means I've made a bandbox. I've now selected 4 items. I'm going to stick them on the done box and they'll disappear, and I'll explain in a moment what's happening here. I just want to show one other feature. I've kept the title from Tom's original demo, the chum bucket. So you're going through your notes, you're thinking, this is completely irrelevant, it's just padding, whatever, I don't need it. And the chum bucket basically marks it yellow, so you remind yourself you've done it. It has no more meaning than that. Sorry, well, it's actually poppy color I'm using. When I stick it on here, it disappears. Now, what I'm actually doing, I just slip back into the outline, is what the done, originally what I had it doing was just removing the aliases. But I thought, actually, especially if you're going to be working with data and you're actually going to be pulling forward more data, you don't want the data going round and round and round again. So I've set, in this case, the idea is that what we're going to do on the map is when we finish, this container of data will be empty, and everything will either be under reviewed data, or the chum bucket items will be separately stored. So we won't destroy them, we won't get rid of them, but we've moved them elsewhere. So, and in the process, I get rid of the alias. So let me go back and explain how that magic happens. So if I select the done adornment, and again, Command Option I, or I could right click to open, actually, no, I don't want that. Sorry, I want the inspector data, which is Command 1. And the action, there are a series of them. So the first part is an if statement. And basically I'm saying if the color is poppy, and I know because I coded it, that's an unwanted item. So take the original of this alias, and put the original in the unwanted items container. If it isn't, i.e. it is something we'll want to look at later, do the same, in this case, put the original in the reviewed data, which we saw here. So some stuff is in reviewed data and some stuff is in unwanted items.
And what's interesting about that, by doing that, then you've now moved them out of the data directory. So now the agent will no longer look for them.
Yeah, and the part of the point there is you might be doing a process where even as you're winding down this queue, you get some more data. Someone sends you some more data. You just put it in this folder, it will then magically turn up in the map in the notes review, and you go on and you process it. But the two other things that get done is so that should say is processed. That's probably why I've got some stuff turning up. Is processed. I thought I had too many items up here. Is processed is the thing that causes something to be seen by this map. So what we want to do, if I look at the query, it says inside data and it is processed is false. So on the map, importantly, as I take things off the map, I want to make sure that I've set is processed to true, so they don't loop round and turn back in the notes review. This is not strictly needed, but I'm going to set the has been examined Boolean, which ensures things turn up on the notes review, but when I move them, I can then move them around on the map. I'm going to set that back to the default value because that means nothing gets saved. So if I was doing 100 or 500 notes review, I'm not saving has been examined as true in 500 notes. It's just more data we don't need. And then the last bit of magic is something that you definitely couldn't do back in the day of the original demo is I'm saying delete this. And what I'm telling Tinderbox to do is to delete the alias, not the original. If I wrote delete original, that would not be ideal because I would have got rid of the actual note. But the point being that I've finished dealing with, I take an alias, I take an alias, I decide it's got some data in it, and I don't need this alias anymore. But what I do need is that note, which that's the one I just worked on.
Now, Mark, if you hadn't done delete this, eventually it would get deleted when the agent went to refresh itself, and the note wouldn't be found. The alias.
Yes, it would. And it may be that wasn't strictly necessary. It was because when I originally did it, I wasn't moving the originals around. So what I was actually doing is I was removing the aliases out of the agent. Now, to explain that to people who are wondering what that means is the way an agent works is every time the agent is evaluated, it looks at its query and it looks for all the notes that meet it, and it creates an alias, one alias for each of the notes that matches. If you delete the alias that's inside the agent, or you drag it elsewhere for some reason, the agent will, when next time it updates its query, say, oh right, I'm missing one, so it makes a new alias. So you can end up in a situation where if you're trying to work down a list where your list keeps filling up as fast as you empty it. So what I was experimenting with in this case was whether you could delete things, and this does actually work. It does delete the alias. The alias would auto delete if the note, probably because I've changed that would also delete the alias as well. But as I say, it's just an experiment here, and you can play with this.
Well, the nice thing with that though is it deletes the alias immediately, as opposed to it's sitting there for X period of time until the agent updates.
Yeah, and if you've got a large and busy document, sometimes, and if you're working fast and you'll see something in your peripheral vision thing that shouldn't be there, that should have gone. So this, I think, is quite a neat method, and it was just the first time I actually used the delete command in anger in this fashion. So that essentially is the process. It's as simple or as complicated as that. And what you now see, if the colors actually are a bit dark here. If I was to, 1 second, I'll just change this so the colors are, oops, sorry. Well, that's not going to work because that's a problem. Getting colors to show in the outline was a bit hard, but suffice it to say, we've got some green things here that are positive. We've got some red ones that are negative. We've got some things with a quote badge that we're telling ourselves are things we want to quote. Now, for instance, you could, on this container, you could set a sort on some attribute that you'd been setting on the map, which might be helping you if the reviewed data is something, it might help you order the notes because you're going to write a report. In the original scenario, that is literally what Tom was doing. He'd be writing this report in the aircraft on the way back from the place he'd done the polling, so it was all in a tight time frame. Most of us aren't working up against that crunch, but nonetheless, there's nothing to stop you going to the reviewed data, going to the sort panel and choosing to sort the contents, the child notes on any criteria you choose. A point to bear in mind about flags that we talked about earlier is we set a flag for one of these, but you'll notice the flags don't turn up in outline view. If I was to open, if I open that in
All right.
Yep, far right. Okay, sorry. If I change that now to a map, just to make the point, one of these should have,
Oh, you know what? The alias had the flag, not the original. So if you go back to your code and you say flag original.
Yeah, good point. That's very interesting because I wouldn't have expected that to happen. But
update pairs to flag original.
Yeah, good point. Good catch. And we'll put, so it's Mycenas, and if we go to, it's doing this naughty thing. Yeah. Oh, well, I didn't know. I did not know that the flags were an intrinsic attribute. So here's another little learning thing for those who are used to it. There is a notion in Tinderbox attributes of things being intrinsic. And what that means is that if any given attribute, which only, and this is only true of system attributes, if it's said to be intrinsic, what it means is the alias does not share or can have a different value to its originals. And one of the reasons is exactly this. So if I take a map and I do, well, these are a different size. These are different to the aliases. They've in fact moved, but the point is probably better shown here that if I make this a different size, I am not making the height and width of the original different. I'm only changing the height and width of the alias.
And one other area where this may come up, if you start doing linking, linking is intrinsic. So if you've done a bunch of linking on original notes, and then you go look at the alias of that note, and you're like, wait a minute, where did all my links go? Well, all the links are actually on the original note, not on the alias. And there's action code that you can do to reproduce links on aliases if you want to get there. But that's something that can freak you out sometimes if you run agents and you're like, oh, my work's gone. It's not. It's just you can't see links on aliases.
So we've now been through, and just to make the point that what we should find now is the data is empty and everything is either in reviewed data or in unwanted items. So we've gone through our 15 odd things, 3 things we don't need for the next stage of our process. We haven't lost them. So none of the data is lost. The notes are still there, but they're stored separately from the stuff we're now going to take into the next stage of our.
All right, so Mr. Mark, I've got a challenge for you.
Yeah.
So we've just done some high-level qualitative data analysis, which is wickedly cool. And later you could apply and do link strategies and all that. But now I want to challenge you to build me a dashboard. So tell me how many good things there are.
Okay. So good. It's item sentiment is positive. So what we could do is we could go to here. What we'll do is we'll give ourselves a dashboard note. We might say in action, we're going to say $prototype equals, oh, I haven't added dashboard, equals dashboard. And I think there's, if I recall, there's a built-in dashboard prototype, which there is. So we'll pop that in. So that's just turned up there. And the reason will become apparent when we go to open this in a new tab. So that opens now. I don't know whether you're, I don't know, I'm not sure if I can move. I'm not sure if I can move that. I don't know if you're seeing it or not, but I've got the Zoom window controller sitting over my screen. And if you're seeing it, I apologize. So I'm going to go into here and it's a map. So I'm going to say, we'll create a note. It could be an agent. We'll do it as an agent. We'll make it an agent. And we'll give that, and we're going to say query item sentiment equals positive.
Oh.
I mean, there are lots of ways of doing this, and this actually
is the way I did it in
most-
Mark O'Connor's demo, so that's good.
So let's just get that out of the way. And in this case, so it means I could drill down to see what they are, but I don't really want all that in the way. So I'm going to pull that up. So this is quite neat. You can do this in an agent. The title is at the bottom on a map. A container. If I made a note, another note, and I put that inside that one, you'll see that you get the same thing. It's just the title is at the top. So that's just rubbish. I'll get rid of that. So we got an agent, but we don't want to call it agent. We want to call it positive. We'll call it positive. And what we might, and one way we might set that is, well, we could use the display expression, but what we'll do is we'll go to here. We'll use the subtitle. And we'll say the subtitle equals child count. So I'm basically just typing in here. Okay, so I need should.
I think you might need a rule subtitle.
Yeah.
Or can you do that?
I probably will. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you need a rule that says subtitle equals child count, or need it. Yeah.
$.
And you see the subtitles 4.
There you go. And so there are lots of ways. There are lots of ways you can do this. I did put, if you want to play around with this sort of thing, I did put a data set in the. It's in the forums. There is a data set. It's all sort of Beatles recordings. So there are lots of sort of stats you can play around with. And there's a whole. So the data's in there. There's a worked example in there you can play with. If you want to sort of noodle around with dashboards. And do things like you can also I won't try and do this on the fly now, but you can also create plots in this area here. Let's see if I've got. Might be able to show you.
So to be clear, Mark, there's nothing special about the dashboard prototype.
No, it was
the dashboard. All you're doing is really doing the subtitle equals, and you've created a dashboard.
Yes. What it can do is it can give you consistent styling across a whole. So sometimes it's useful to set a prototype even before you know what you're going to do with it. In other words, make all the things, just get the information down, and then you can go back using your prototype and set, a nicer color, or you might have a progress bar. You might make the title area a progress bar. You can do. Sorry, it's not showing. It's showing up. So this is an example. This is what a container plot can look like. So the plot bit is this graph, and what this is doing is basically graphing a value of the child notes of a container. So there's a lot you can do, and if you have sort of quantitative data, that can be quite useful. Sometimes you might want to show your progress against a target, so you can have progress bars. You can even have a sort of an aim marker, so you have a dotted line that shows you where you should be, where your progress bar should be. You should be 55% complete. You're actually only 50, or you're 70, complete. And those are, if I go back to here, I think I can quickly show you a picture of, is it progress bars? I got those in here. So this is the trouble over time. Over time in ATV Ref, things have grown in different places, and I can't remember where I put it now. Essentially. So in this guy here, here's a bar in that case, but you can do you can. There are some. I got the. Let's see if I look at something like. Progress. Where is my? There we go. So here you can see. So in this bottom thing, we've got a horizontal bar that's using basically it's using dollar color and dollar accent color as the two colors. And the line here is the target line. And if you want to play around with setting those, where all the magic happens, if you want to do it in the UI, is in the plot tab of the inspector. Not every single setting for some of these patterns is available there, but you can find most of them. Otherwise, you can just set them via code. So does that help for dashboards? I'm not sure there's anything else. I deliberately didn't want to overload this demo, as to say that there are some notes here that hopefully will step you through it. If you get stuck, ask in the forums. What I hope will happen is people will go through this, change it, not just use this, say that's fine, but it's rubbish. What I want to do is this. I want to use these attributes. At which point you probably will find something won't quite work. Drop it. Best thing is if you can share a copy of the Tinderbox, drop it into the forum, and then we can look at it and we can comment on it and help fix it for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a few other things that for me, because I like to publish out of Tinderbox, I would create, for example, a container called resources, and then I'd have a container called terms, and then I would define what I mean by boat, plane, apple, right? So that when I'm actually publishing my report out of this, my definitions, and I would define what I mean by good or what I mean by bad, right? So that way I can publish out of Tinderbox, essentially a glossary of terms that are related to this research.
Sure.
Art, what's up?
Yeah, hi guys. This is beautiful. I'm just totally in the middle of doing something that and I'm going to use this forever. But perhaps one of you can. Thanks so much, Mark. Perhaps one of you can sort of verbalize this better than I. But there's something really interesting about the idea of having an attribute as a sort of flag that then advises you that several operations have been performed on your note. So the idea of having this has been evaluated attribute. It sort of implies to you that now that note has been through X number of processes or has been and so that if you actually have another kind of a dashboard or progress definer in your Tinderbox document, you could almost then evaluate how many of your notes you have actually run through various processes like this to make sense of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think using flags could get very baroque very quickly. But if you designed it and you know what's in there, I think you can get some fantastic visual data density in there. And that could be quite useful. If you know what it is and it means something to you, what's great about that is you're not having to read words or look at a value in a box somewhere to know what it is. You can probably pack quite a lot of process information just in that. And given the fact that that process information when you're done may be completely disclosable. So, for instance, if you've got it packed into a number of flags, you can just reset the flags data, all gone, don't need to worry about it anymore. And you sort of tidied up. So it's another nice thing. I mean, one of the reasons I haven't played around with flags is it wasn't until about a week or so ago I finally figured out that, you know, you could do what Tom was doing. You just needed, the trick was this thing of basically using an agent with the sorting turned off, using a smart adornment to pull your list, as it were, in, and then figure out how you stop things going round and round and being picked up again.
Right.
Mark, this is really wickedly cool. Thank you for having done that.
And I'm sure people, yeah, I see, I get shut, but I mean, I'm actually absolutely, I will be amazed if people don't take this away and make something much, much better out of it. I've tried to keep it fairly bare bones, so that I want to avoid this thing that I see people coming up saying, I want to make a Zettelkasten. And then, you know, it's got to look exactly like the one on the box. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. There's a really interesting metaphor here for handling data. So use it in a way that makes sense to your process, but you've got most of the bare bones of the sort of the control of flow in this in the Tinderbox that's up in front of you. The one I started with is the one I've linked to in the forum chat for this, so that the forum thread for today has this document already uploaded. Chuck.
So again, thanks. This is really helpful. One of the things that occurs from a practical point of view is that if somebody were using this, they might have done what you just did, pull a node out from the review container and do a couple things with it and realize, oh, I pulled the wrong node. I did something I didn't want to do. Putting it all back, would it be just drag the node back into the same container? Or
well, because if I basically tell, so actually it's not that one. It's, so I renamed, I started using some of Tom's terminology and I didn't, I thought it was unhelpful. So that's interesting. There may be a gap, but essentially, if for all of these should be, they should all end up unticked, because we set that on the way out, and all these should actually be ticked, which should stop them showing up. But if I'll just for a second, I'll just do this. If I untick this guy file, I'll just force it to update, and I should get,
Well, remember, because the agent's only looking at the data directory, correct?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my bad. So I'll do that. Yeah, exactly.
Move it
So
back
you could put a stamp in. So one of the things you could do is, in fact, the answer here would be we'd make a stamp.
You'd have like a re-review stamp or something.
Yeah. So exactly. So we're,
well, what I was wondering was, could you use that? Could you use the container that you used to hold the raw data, so that when you could drag it back to that same container and have it undo?
Yes.
I think the answer is obviously yes. I'm just raising it because I think that would be an embellishment of this.
So the way you do that is I'd select this guy, go to here, and I'd say, now for a new note, it's going to be false because Boolean's always false. But if I take this guy and why is it not? There we go. And I drop him in here. The flag's been cleared,
turned off,
and now he's turned up in the map.
So could you take another new note that you've already got there, sitting out there in the open, and drag it back to that container and have the same effect?
Yes. So if I
obviously you can. I'm just pointing out that might be an interesting embellishment. Well,
here's a note somewhere else in the document. Of course, by default, a Boolean is set false. So is process will be false for this anyway, but it's outside the scope of the sorting map. But if I drag this guy into this folder. It doesn't need to have is process reset because it's correct, but it now turns up. It's now seen by this agent because this agent only looks inside data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so absolutely, and this is a sort of embellishment that I was sort of had in mind, because depending on how you work, some people are more iterative, some people are batch processing, and so there is. I want to stress there's no one right way to do this. The only gotcha you want to avoid in this process is making sure you don't keep reprocessing the same thing, because you need something to say, yes, it should go in here, and you need a way to tell yourself it's done. What you do with it when it's done, again, is up to you. You could, for instance, have left everything where it was in the data folder and just collected information about it and been done at that point. Mm-hmm. So again, don't overinvest the exact method I've shown you as being the absolute best way to do it, because the best way to do it will be the best way that suits your workflow and your problem.
Well, the reason I raised the issue was that to me, it struck me that this was a tremendous illustration of how to work in an ad hoc manner, to sort and organize. Triage is the term that you used. And one of the things that makes people much more comfortable when they're working in that environment is when they can undo what they did. Yep. And it seems to me it's just as applicable to what you demonstrated. And so I just thought I would point that out, because I think it shows the power of building an application allows you to do a bunch of things, but also have that application help you undo or reset things back to the way they were, so that you could try a different approach. Yeah,
and the fact that and if you really mess up somehow, basically it's backed onto some attribute, and if for some reason it's got not worked, you can go and fix that. So you have undo on several levels in a sense. Yes. And the main thing is you're not breaking anything. The nice thing here is that we're just using aliases, and you basically here effectively you've got an in tray. Now I admit I'm on a 24-inch screen here, so this is going to be harder to do on a laptop, certainly, because over time most of the way the maps work in Tinderbox is the text is bigger and everything, so you might need to make some accommodations. And again, the way I constructed the test data here is I'm literally just taking I'm just taking some text. It might be that you'd have shorter text, and you might have a longer note in there. There's nothing to stop you having a note with text using this, or indeed a note that already has some custom values you've put in displayed attributes. All that's perfectly possible. You don't have to be setting the only custom data using this. That again, this goes back to the original context, which was I've just done an exit poll, I've got to write a report. What's the quickest way I can motor through this, pick out all the key terms, capture that data, put them in an order, put all the positives in front of the negatives, or whatever you need, and start to write a report of it. But that's not what everyone needs to do, which is why I didn't want to put too much of that back end process there, because otherwise I think it would confuse the rather elegant simple bit. Which is what I first saw when I saw Tom's method all that while back, which is this way of effectively having like a visual stamping method. But you don't press buttons, you actually move things. It does what it says it does. Now it's not going to work if you've got 50 or 100 choices, but I that's wouldn't strike me as the right approach to want to do for that anyway. But where you just want to motor through a number of things, and for instance what you could do is you could go through once with the first 10 things, reset the board, set up some different adornments, and start over. So in other words, you concentrate on the flow. You have a nice simple playing board, as it were, and you concentrate on see the text that's there. Because one of the other things about this is that you'll notice the one thing that isn't happening here is we're not doing lots of effectively string matching. So it allows you to use this and the insights that you have, that things that aren't necessarily written on the page. So you may have, you've got some text about something. the value that you're looking for may not be anywhere in there, but you infer that because you know that information. And as you say, but by the method Chuck's mentioned, if you just want to reset these flags, you can put everything back in the top of the hopper and go around again, whether it's to redo the data or to just set a completely different sort of data, all possible.
Hey, let me, can I show a practical example of some of this type of work?
Yeah, should I stop?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, let me. So before I move on, do you guys, anybody else have any other questions or anything of this? No? Okay. So in our last kind of 7 minutes, I'll just show you how this kind of work using Tinderbox can actually convert to something more practical. I've shown this before, but I just ran an event in May, and so I had a bunch of speakers I had associated with the event. And so we could use that kind of triaging methodology to like populate the attribute values of the particular note. And so then the organization I was working with said, hey, Becker, can you write a blog article on the event we just did? So I said, sure, no problem. And what I went ahead in this particular Tinderbox file, I went and created a note and I added in, and started writing my article. And I'm like, hey, we had a great event. Here's the URL. And so I was basically looking at my notes from the event to go through and say, okay, we had this great agenda and here's the topics we talked about. And then as I was thinking about the event, look, to demonstrate quantitatively how great this event is, let's go ahead and, look at some of the numbers. So for example, I went in and I said, all right, great. Let's count how many, companies we had associated with the event. So I ran an agent that says, basically, look at my set. And this is another way of doing the agents that Mark was showing before, is rather than saying my name equals X, I can say my set equals dot contains name. And what this agent structure is essentially doing is look at the agent's my set, and then go find every note that has the name related to that. So this is another way of doing it. And so essentially what I did is I ran a stamp that said, go pull the company names from every one of the speakers, and then apply that to the agent, and then go find me all of those notes, and then get me a count that there were 44 companies related to speaking at the event. So that's one way to start quantifying this. I then ran some other stamps that said, go pull all of the titles of the speakers. And then I ran some quick numbers, and I could then say, okay, look, we had 44 speakers, 11 of them were CEOs. So I was able to start now quantifying what we did at the event. Similarly, I ran a stamp that said, go pull all the hashtags that I generated for the event. And the way that worked was I basically have I put terms that were associated with every one of the events, like this session was related to the meeting of the waters. And then in the background, I have Tinderbox going in, running a rule that is essentially, actually I put that in the template. So when I actually go view that particular note in the template, I'll show you here in the template. When I'm looking at that particular note in the template, I'm having Tinderbox actually look at all of the terms and then generate a hashtag cloud for me in real time when looking at that particular note. So if I go back here, and I did this because when I wanted to go email everyone in the event and say, hey, thank you for joining the event, I had Tinderbox go through and let me put the right tag there. So it basically pre-created the email that I wanted to be able to send them for that particular event. So that was kind of cool in doing that and saying, hey, thank you for joining the event. So essentially what this does is similar to what Mark was showing in creating dashboards and quantifying those activities. I was then able to do just that with this particular program. So I was able to say, all right, here we are. I wonder what's going on there. That's fine. I must have hit the wrong outline view. There you go. I was able to start writing the event, going back to my other document, quantifying what was going on in the event, pulling out the hashtags and all of that, and I start writing my article. This one, though, I thought was actually really cool. If you go back to the agent, I was able to say, hey, Tinderbox, go pull all of the companies that were related to the event. I then wrote myself a stamp that said, and this is one example of, I don't want this always running in the background. It's just a one-off thing I want to do right now. And I said, hey, Tinderbox, what I want you to do is go collect, first clear out the text of the agent. Then I want you to create a list by collecting the IDs of all of the children. I then want you to cycle through that list. And this is an example of doing that plus equals that of text that Mark was showing us earlier. I then want you to do essentially go and grab the short title for every one of those companies. And what I'm doing is take the ID number of that note, and that becomes the X here. So go get the ID number for that note, and also go grab its URL, and then format that in a markdown way of formatting a URL string. So by applying this stamp, I have Tinderbox automatically go through all of these companies and essentially give me a markdown for creating anchor links of their name and their URL. I then can preview that. Here's all of the text. If I go ahead and apply my preview in Pandoc, I can actually see I now have the ability of having all of their URLs. So then I formatted a little bit to put a spacer in between each URL. So all of a sudden, and then I also did a similar thing in a keyword cloud. So essentially, I was just deconstructing all of my notes from what we had done and preparing for and launching the event. And voila, I now have my blog article, right? We had a great event, transformative agenda. We talked about a bunch of terms. Here's the event by the numbers, over 300 speakers, 26 sessions, and 11 half hours of content. And again, that's how I got that, as I had Tinderbox basically just go through and say, add up for every session, go look at every session and add up the cumulative time for that particular event. So I got that we had 11 hours and 50 minutes of recorded content. I grabbed their titles, I grabbed the links for every company. So this then takes me off to that company's website. Or will in a second. I'll grab a different one. And then you'll also see then I was able to then write up a little more and then drop in the keyword cloud and the hashtag cloud and the anchor cloud. So if I go paste this now into a LinkedIn post, all of this is going to get automatically tagged to be able to do as a LinkedIn post. And so that's a great example again of doing that qualitative analysis that Mark was just showing us and actually pulling that into a publishable written piece. So you can see that this interacts with every one of the websites. Plus, from a marketing perspective, now I've got every company we interacted with. I've got backlinking going on that in my particular blog post that will come out of that. So I don't know. I just think it. I wanted to demonstrate that because I think it kind of shows close the loop on what Mark was showing us. Thoughts, comments, reactions?
Cool.
Okay.
A tip, you might be wondering if you want to go through where you want to do counts or something. You say, well, I want all the, I want to count all the different sort of types of jobs that people have, but I want to know a count for each one. Is as long as you have, well, the first thing is if you might need to make them all uppercase or lowercase or something, so you don't have, the same, the CEO uppercase, the CEO lowercase are the same. But once you can do that, then a dictionary is your friend, because basically you get all the different names, you make those as dictionary keys, and then you go through and you count the occurrence and you make that, then that value becomes the value of that dictionary key. And now you've got a dictionary that is, in this case, will be a set of job titles and a count of the occurrence of all of them. I see a hand up.
Mark, are you using the word dictionary in the context of how basically JSON key value pair?
Yes, Tinderbox as of version 8 something, I think, has a dictionary data type, which is effectively there's one limitation at the moment, is it doesn't cope well with values key value values that are themselves lists, because they use the same delimiter. But essentially, if you were to take a bit of Tinderbox dictionary data and just drop it into text, what you'll see is a list of key colon value semicolon items.
Okay, is there anything in the real world use of the word dictionary, a term will have multiple meanings. And if you get down to the world of acronyms, a term,
Yeah,
unique, that's nice, but terms have many meanings as they cross contexts.
yep.
Can Tinderbox natively handle that, or has to be magically coded?
Well, in that case, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, David, where I create notes for terms. And so then you could actually have attributes on those term notes that actually have context.
So you have a note for a term, you have a note, you have a term, you have a note hanging off of it, and then you can throw multiple descriptions.
Correct.
Into, okay.
Yeah, and I mean, Tinderbox, it basically under everything has a unique ID. It's the value of $ID basically is the UID of the object. And if you were to look at the XML source of a Tinderbox document, that one of the things that's always saved for a note is that ID. And in fact, an alias has, for obvious reasons, has an ID of its own, because it's a sort of separate object. Which is why you can have multiple notes with the same name. So you could have two notes called note, with the same casing. And Tinderbox is fine. If you have two notes with the same name in the same container, then it gets a bit squirrely, because you're now making it difficult. Of course, in that case, you would need to probably address them by their ID. But generally, the note, if a note's name is not unique within a Tinderbox document, the rubric is that anything that's trying to match on that bit, something like a find or an agent query, will match the first. So an agent will match the first match to the multiple duplicates, as it were. So if you have three notes all called a note, it will always match the first one in outline order, even though the three are separate things, because it can't tell from the name alone that they're separate.
Okay. And on that note, David, this is why I've taken to the convention of adding prefixes, right? So Michael Becker in this context, Michael Becker is a speaker. And therefore, when I look at his notes, you'll also see Michael. So this speaker, Michael Becker, is actually linking to the note that is Michael Becker, right? And so then here's the Michael Becker note, and you'll see that he is linked to being a speaker. So that way, in the future, when I'm running another event out of this document, and you'll see he's a speaker for this particular event, MEF Connects. So if I do another event and I have another Michael Becker being a speaker, you'll see that I can do that. So the other nice thing about that too, when you're doing that, it works great for zip linking. So if I start typing the word Michael Becker, I can figure out, well, which Michael Becker am I looking for? Am I looking for the Michael Becker bio, the Michael Becker headshot, the Michael Becker speaker, for a particular event? And then I have in my notes, every one of my notes has some action code that's running what I call a function I call short title. And essentially what that short title function does is it show you that way. What that short title function does is it simply splits at the hyphen after the first space, and then drops everything else in a short title. So if you go back into that demonstration I was showing you earlier about
can it pull apart a camel case?
Well, if you tell it to, right? Yeah. You can. Where's my event copy?
That's cheating if you're just using dashes.
right? So I'm just trying to keep it simple, right? So if I go now here and I'm looking at the speaker poll, you'll see then the name of the node is Speaker Michael Becker, but the short title is Michael Becker, this event. And so when you saw me generate from here, this agent, you'll notice that if I go back to that stamp I was showing you here, that's why I was telling Tinderbox, because now watch this. You see here, it says Control Shift and their URL. If I were pulling the name of the company and not the short title, you'll see it's entity hyphen Control Shift URL, because I use the prefix entity in front of my note names. Right. And so now I have ultimate flexibility to distinguish, because and partly what drove me to doing that was I realized when I was doing my industry analysis, a lot of companies will name their products after their company name. So like the password manager, 1Password, the company's 1Password, and their product is 1Password. So in Tinderbox, how do I distinguish between the product and the company?
And so we're into Lotus and DeBasey territory. Never mind. That's fun.
But it's a good embrace. To me, it's a good embracing of real world messy constraints. So people don't give you nice data, so they keep reusing the same term, and one has to work around
reusing the same term for different meanings, and they never. I mean, the mental thing I'm wrestling with is how do you capture context easily?
Yeah, and I to a degree, ATB ref is about a 16, 17 year sort of contemplation on that, and I don't think I've got the answer yet.
Good. I unfortunately, that's good news.
Well, and I think the answer is you don't catch it easily, but you capture it incrementally.
Right.
And you do that by adding values back.
As little fragments whip by, you pick something up and say, I'm going to put it in that box. I'm going to put it in some box.
The thing that's difficult, and it's, for instance, again, it's writ large in ATBRF as a resource, is that indexing is hard. I mean, and well, when you compare a computer-generated index with a human index one, the human index one, by and large, is shorter, more concise, and more useful. Because unless you've written a really, really clever program, probably longer than the human to do it, you're not going to capture that nuance. So it's a chicken egg problem. How to do that, and I've over the years played with various things, because in terms of writing a document about Tinderbox that describes how Tinderbox works is very meta in exactly the form you've mentioned, because you keep having terms
remember I'm a total virgin here. I'm 112 pages. When I'm reading, am I reading Tinderbox Way on an iPhone, how much different does it look on an iPad? Or because the real estate's bigger. If I go to page 112 on my iPhone, if I go to Tinderbox page 112, it's not going to be in the same place.
It won't, because it's a PDF and it has PDF has no knowledge of such things, and ebooks are technology is still settling down ebooks. They may. So, for instance, I know that to pass sort of Google stop complaining about it, I rewrote the templates for ATB ref, and for instance, it will format for a phone screen versus, say, an iPad versus a large screen, but it's not going to. It doesn't. The modern digital formats have no notion of a page, which is a print notion. We happily sort of translate mentally between the two. Our technology, I've found, not so much, mainly because I think it's not ill will. It's just nobody told the people who were doing that particular thing at the time, it will be useful if you built this mapping in. As a result, we don't have it, so it makes it kind of difficult. PDF, because it pretends to be paper, persists. Broadly, it has that page structure because you can't do the opposite. You can't take it out, and indeed, it's often very difficult to extract the body text out of a PDF without getting all the stuff like the page numbers, which you sure as heck don't want coming along for the ride.
Right. So David, let me show you something. I think this is where you're going though, and that's kind of the beauty of the hypertext world and such. So, for example, if you looked at my glossary of terms. Right, here's the glossary terms, and this actually is indexed to that place within the book, right? And the way I went about doing that actually is in the templating. You'll notice here that I'm putting essentially anchor tags with every one of the links. And so I'll show you an example of that when I scroll down to the template.
Just quickly, I've got a
Yeah, we've got to wrap up.
Call. What I'm going to do is I'm just about to break for supper. When I get back, I'm going to check because while I was presenting, I think I left a couple of loose ends. I don't think I break anything. But what I'll do is if I find some things, I will re-upload to the thread for today's meetup with a mark that I've edited some. It's just some of the looping structure for making sure things don't go background in the sorting. But,
so if I just so for future reference, we can talk about this in another session, but if you're building out a template, you can tell Tinderbox to put anchor tags like value ID. And so this is essentially putting the ID number of that note. And so if you're doing like indexes and such like that, you then can create cross links back and forth between larger documents. And that's a strategy how to do that. We don't have time to go through that today. We've talked about it in the past, but using anchor tags like that in your for cross-linking in your templates is really, really powerful for documentation.
Yeah, I'm going to leave you guys to talk on.
Right.
I'm going to have to drop.
Well, good. Hey, Mark, that was amazing, brilliant, loved it. Thank you. I've been wanting to see that for about 2 years now, so that was awesome.
Me too.
Nicely done. Yeah.
Very enjoyable. Have a great week, guys.
Good job. Hey, Peter, you have a second?
Sure.